Have you noticed? Daily meals have now become a burden. A carton of eggs, $8. A bottle of milk out of stock. A bunch of baby kale, now over $6. And that's just breakfast. But the scariest part lies in the reason behind it. American farmers are leaving the fields. In Iowa, there are more farm for sale signs than equipment wanted signs. In California, farmland is abandoned due to lack of water and lack of fruit pickers. And most recently, Congress is still debating whether to raise taxes on farmers. If American farmers stop producing, what will happen first? And which state will collapse first? In today's video, we'll take a look at the first 10 US states to be wiped out. When farmers stop producing, where a silent crisis is emerging right on your dinner table. Note that this information has been compiled from statistical data and is not intended to defame any organization or individual. Number 1. Kansas. For decades, Americans could rest assured that as long as Kansas grew wheat, the country would never go hungry. But by summer 2025, that confidence has begun to falter, because Kansas itself, the heart of U.S. wheat agriculture, is gradually giving up. This place used to be proudly called the breadbasket of America. More than 25% of domestic wheat once came from this state's vast fields. But now, according to the latest data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and SFMA, today's June 4, 2025 update, more than one-third of Kansas wheat farmland has been abandoned or leased out. Farmers have stopped producing, not out of laziness, but because they simply can't bear the burden anymore. Fertilizer costs have risen over 60% compared to the same time last year, while wheat prices have barely moved. Worse still, if Congress doesn't extend the TCJA tax provisions, farmers may face up to $9 billion more in taxes annually. In Kansas alone, each household would owe over $5,000 more on average. For many small farms, already burdened with bank debt and living expenses, $5,000 isn't just a number, it's the line between continuing to farm or giving up. And they are giving up. In some towns, locals whisper, "Not farming loses less than farming." That thought, seemingly irrational, is now spreading. Because when farmers are hit with skyrocketing input costs, looming taxes, and no one willing to pay a fair price for their products, they feel backed into a corner. Then the consequences spread to supermarkets, local markets, and our dinner tables. In large chains like Dillon's Hy-Vee or Save-A-Lot, Kansas bread is slowly disappearing. Instead, you see labels like "produced in Ontario," ingredients from Alberta. Some elderly folks are shocked to find that the familiar old loaf of bread now costs the same as a hot fried chicken meal. For retirees living on fixed incomes, it's not just a price shock, it's a sense of loss. They're eating imported bread right on the land that grows wheat. It's a paradox that leaves many unsure whether to feel sad or angry. In American culture, bread is not luxurious, but it is symbolic. When the housing bubble burst in 2008, when COVID shut cities down in 2020, there was still bread on the table. But by 2025, for many in Kansas, that loaf of bread is becoming a luxury. It's like the final line between a nation of self-reliance and a country dependent on the outside world just to eat breakfast. Even more dangerously, this shift is barely being talked about. No emergency meetings, no special news bulletins. Farmers stop producing quietly. Supermarkets switch bread labels without announcement. Policies on taxes, immigration, or agricultural support quietly shift amid bigger political debates. But for people in Kansas and middle-aged Americans in other farming states, every small change is slicing away at their income, their meals, and their sense of pride that we can feed ourselves. Some may ask, why does it matter so much when we can import bread from Canada, Mexico, or Europe? The answer lies in something many people feel but can't name: a sense of control. When you know your loaf of bread is made from wheat grown just outside town, you feel the country is still steady. But when you're forced to eat bread from elsewhere because the growers can't afford to keep farming, you begin to feel helpless in your own country. Number 2, Texas. In Texas now, even if you have the money, you might not get a proper barbecue cut. And it's not just a food issue, it's a warning. that the American way of life here is starting to shake. Texas used to be the hub of America's beef industry with over 4.3 million cattle, nearly 14% of the nation's total herd, according to the USDA in 2024. But in just the first half of 2025, the total herd dropped nearly 9%, the lowest in 15 years. Not because people are eating less, but because ranchers can no longer afford to continue. Livestock feed prices rose 21% in just 6 months. Endless droughts in the panhandle turned grass into dry straw. Vet labor and fuel costs are soaring. Each year I pay more taxes and sell less meat. At this rate, no one can survive off cattle anymore, sighed Joe, a ranch owner in Canyon. But the damage doesn't stop at the ranch. It spreads to every small street, every town where beef is not just an industry. It's a cultural symbol. In Texas, BBQ is where fathers teach sons how to light a grill, where workers and teachers, the most ordinary people, feel in control of at least one thing, their own meal. Yet now in many small towns, BBQ restaurants are slowly disappearing. Local beef is too expensive, and they're forced to switch to frozen imports from Brazil or Australia, the kind of meat locals jokingly call foreign BBQ. But behind that joke is not laughter, it's a loss. The meat isn't fragrant, isn't tender, doesn't taste like Texas. And then the impact spreads to supporting industries, meat processing, plants, close packing. Workers lose jobs and suppliers of equipment and services for livestock face collapse. People in Texas, like many across the US, are cutting back on spending cooking at home to survive inflation. But cooking 3 meals a day amid beef shortages and soaring fresh food prices becomes an economic burden and a mental battle. How do you make meals with enough protein nutrients and familiar flavors without draining your wallet? I believe you felt that too. Maybe you've stood puzzled in front of an empty fridge trying to calculate every dollar in the grocery store so dinner doesn't ruin the week's budget. And that's not even the worst part, because Texas is just the tip of the iceberg. When major food-producing states fall into crisis, the next dominoes will be the states that can't feed themselves, where people have no choice but to rely on supermarkets. Can you guess the third name on today's list? Number 3, Nevada. If Kansas and Texas still have a sliver of hope thanks to fertile plains or vast farms, then Nevada, in the heart of the desert, never had fields to cling to. The glitzy city of Las Vegas doesn't sow, doesn't reap. That's why when agricultural states stop producing Nevada wobbles immediately. In the past, Las Vegas was buffet heaven. With just $24, you could feast on king crab and grilled ribs. The middle class here ate abundantly to the point that each night tons of leftovers were collected and donated to charities. Sandwiches, vegetables, untouched bread, they were lifelines for thousands of homeless people sheltering in the storm drains, the so-called underground city. There in the sweltering, humid darkness, a community of mole people had quietly existed for years. They had nothing but they could rely on the kindness of those above. One hotel banquet could mean a week of food underground. And though the two worlds were separated by dozens of concrete stairs, what connected them was food, born from the compassion of the fortunate. But in summer 2025, that bond broke. Las Vegas supermarkets began limiting purchases, 6 eggs per person per day at the Walmart on Tropicana. Fresh vegetables from California dropped by nearly half compared to the previous year. Meat, milk, grains, all skyrocketed due to rising transport costs from Texas and Arizona. Restaurants no longer had leftovers, supermarkets no longer had surplus, and the middle class, once quiet benefactors, now struggled to put food on the table daily. Those who once lived under neon lights are now starting to feel hunger, slow, dull, but inevitable. They're not as poor as the mole people, but now everyone's equally hungry. Underground despair is visible. According to Shine a Light, nearly 1,500 homeless people once relied on donated food, but when there's no surplus above, there's nothing to expect. Help LV says bluntly, "We can't distribute food when no one has anything to give. The tunnel lights still flicker dimly, but donation trucks are fewer. Those at the bottom no longer wait for kindness. because even those above are now running on empty. Nevada has no farms, and the City of Lights now resembles a party that's over. The once glorious feast table now bare, as cold and empty as a freezer with nothing left inside. And that's just one city. Let's look now to a place once called America's Salad Bowl, yet this summer they too must cut back their own meals. Number 4, California. In California right now, vegetables are no longer just vegetables. They're a luxury, a measure of the instability seeping into every American kitchen. A bunch of kale that once appeared daily on dinner tables now makes the elderly hesitate. Should they buy greens or save the money for medicine? It sounds hard to believe, but right in the clean vegetable basket of the United States, people are lining up to buy fresh greens limited to just 2 bunches per person per day. California was once the symbol of the clean-eating, green-living lifestyle, where just a few years ago, healthy eating was not a luxury, but an everyday affair. Vast fields in Salinas, Fresno, and the Imperial Valley used to send out millions of vegetable bundles each season, feeding not only locals, but Americans across the country, even Canada and Europe. Eat greens, live healthy, prolong life. That used to be the lifestyle that built this state's reputation. But by the summer of 2025, everything changed too fast. According to a report from the California Farm Bureau, over 33% of the state's vegetables were either destroyed or left unharvested due to labor shortages. After immigration policies tightened at the beginning of the year, tens of thousands of undocumented workers, those who silently picked each bundle of greens season after season, vanished from the farms. The consequences didn't take long. With no one left to harvest, vegetables remained in the fields waterlogged, wilted, and rotting. Meanwhile, very few locals were willing to work outdoors for 15-hour in heat over 100-degree Nain without insurance, without breaks. So even though the soil remained fertile, water was available, and the vegetables kept growing, they never made it to the supermarket. In Pasadena, supermarkets in senior neighborhoods had to post signs limit 2 vegetable bunches per day. In Oakland, spinach rose from $1.89 to $4.29 in just a few months, and still sold out. Some nursing homes in Santa Clara had to remove fresh greens from their lunch menus, replacing them with mashed potatoes and canned carrots, long-lasting but low in nutrients. The sad thing is, for the elderly, who need fresh vegetables the most to manage heart disease and diabetes, these changes are not just inconvenient, they directly affect health and quality of life. One member on the Nextdoor forum shared, "My grandmother is 82, lived frugally, and ate moderately all her life. Now retired, even her meals must be weighed. Eat vegetables today, or save the money to pay the electric bill next month." Worse still, many families have no choice but to buy frozen imported vegetables from Chile or Peru. Vegetables that have been processed are less fresh, lower in nutrients, and significantly more expensive. Vegetables, once the cheapest part of a meal, have now become an expense many are forced to cut. California is not just losing vegetables, it's gradually losing its ability to feed itself. When an entire agricultural system reliant on immigrant labor is disrupted, when farmers can't afford to harvest, when policies drive up production costs, then the lack of vegetables in supermarkets is no longer a temporary glitch. It's a sign of something deeper and more dangerous. In Texas, beef has become so scarce that many people have turned to vegetarianism by necessity. In California, vegetable shortages are making even a simple meal feel like a luxury. So after all this, what do we have left on our plates? If meat, vegetables, and fruit are all too expensive and scarce, if you once chose a clean eating lifestyle, it's time to ask when all options are taken away. Do we still have the right to choose? Number 5, Wisconsin. We've already had to worry about meals without greens, and now even a glass of milk in the morning. The simplest and most essential thing for the next generation is becoming a luxury. In Wisconsin, a name once synonymous with the American dairy industry, this sense of loss is no longer a risk, but a reality quietly eroding the pride of an entire generation. Since early 2025, hundreds of small dairy farms have been forced to shut down, not for lack of cows, but because they can no longer bear the costs of electricity, livestock feed, or repairing the cooling systems to store milk. The labor shortage has forced many farm owners to do everything themselves, from milking at 4 a.m. to packaging and delivery, with every stage short on people, time, and energy. Some haven't slept through the night in a month, but what they fear more than exhaustion is the feeling of being left behind as foreign milk starts to flood supermarket shelves. Bland in taste, lower in nutrients, but cheap and easy to store. In big cities like Madison and Green Bay, people have gotten used to seeing empty milk shelves at supermarkets by the weekend. Many families resort to buying shelf-stable milk from afar, but not every child can handle such substitutes. On local community groups, parents share photos of kids with rashes, stomach aches, or simply refusing to drink, as if their bodies instinctively know this isn't real milk. An elementary school principal in rural Wisconsin shared that they've had to cut the number of free milk servings for students from daily to 3 times a week, and no one knows if there will be milk available next week. What may seem like a minor issue has brought many adults to tears, because they know for children from poor families that school milk is not just a part of the meal, but a sign of care and nourishment. For grandparents who grew up with glass bottles of milk in the kitchen, the clink of early morning deliveries, and full breakfasts with their children, what pains them most isn't the milk shortage, but the helplessness. When a state once called the heart of the dairy industry struggles to raise its own children, perhaps what's disappearing isn't just nutrition, but the belief that we can still provide for, protect, and love with the most basic things. Number 6, Nebraska. Nebraska has never needed to stand out, but on America's food map it used to be the central valve, regulating the flow of corn milk, beef, and even ethanol. The biofuel blended into gasoline since the oil crisis years. An entire modern agricultural system once revolved around it like a heart pumping blood into a growing body. But this year that heart is slowing down. Extended droughts, depleted soil, skyrocketing input costs, and a disappearing young labor force. In just the first quarter of 2025, the state's corn output dropped more than 12%. According to official figures from the Nebraska Corn Board. And when corn drops, everything else follows. Cattle go hungry, farmers sell off herds, domestic meat supplies shrink, and cold storage facilities in Lincoln run at less than half capacity. People in Denver, Kansas City, even Florida are paying extra dollars for weekend barbecues, without realizing the silent culprit is Nebraska. Unlike states that only consume Nebraska as a source, once this origin factory stops running, the entire national supply chain breaks. Trucks have nothing to transport, processing plants lack raw materials. Ethanol shortages at gas stations drive up fuel prices. A system that once ran like a Swiss watch now has gears slipping, and it doesn't stop with just one state. Even more painful, Nebraska used to symbolize American agricultural might. In the 1980s, its population was larger than now. Towns like Kearney and Hastings buzzed with harvest festivals, livestock farms lined the prairies, and farmers' children joined their parents in the fields at age 6. But today, many young people are leaving, no longer believing they can make a living from the land. Once the reason to stay disappears, this land starts bleeding, in both the literal and figurative sense. Nebraska isn't falling from a disaster or a storm. It's quietly dimming, little by little, like an oil lamp in a room no one is refilling. And as this agricultural hub falls silent, other states should start to worry, because this rupture could soon spread, even to hotspots once thought untouchable. Number 7, Florida. Florida no longer grows enough fruit for itself. There aren't enough pickers no one wants to buy, and there's no longer faith to keep planting. The place that once fed the whole US with fresh oranges is facing its worst agricultural crisis in decades. Once accounting for over 70% of domestic orange juice, Florida used to be the fresh fruit capital of the eastern US, but by mid-2025, The oranges once likened to sunshine in winter had stopped appearing regularly in supermarkets. In their place, soaring price tags, $6.50 in Miami, and labels reading product of Mexico or imported from Brazil, stuck on boxes that once glowed with the color of Florida oranges. Florida's citrus industry didn't collapse from a single blow, it was a domino effect. First came the greening disease, causing fruits not to ripen, turning them bitter and shriveled. Then came stricter immigration policies, forcing tens of thousands of undocumented workers, the backbone of the harvesting workforce, to withdraw. Local young people turned to jobs in services, logistics, or tech. Few wanted to go out in 100 degrees of heat to pick oranges by the crate. Meanwhile, transportation, refrigeration, and packaging costs rose by 30 to 40%. Many orchard owners simply let the fruit drop or uprooted their groves and returned the land to wilderness. Concerns about pesticide and chemical fertilizer residues previously flagged by Canadian and European media only made consumers more wary. Exports stalled. Domestic confidence waned. Some supermarkets in New York and Philadelphia even removed Florida oranges from shelves, citing inconsistent quality. For farmers, it was the final blow to their already fragile trust. In Orlando, retirement homes began replacing fresh orange juice with imported orange powder, cheaper, easier to store, but bland and less nutritious. Oranges used to make me feel like I was still healthy. Now it's like drinking fake juice, said Eleanor, 82, sadly. In working middle-class households, oranges have also disappeared from the table, not from lack of desire, but from lack of affordability. Florida is losing what was once its sweetest symbol, not due to natural disasters, but from cold decisions and a resigned mindset. And as the state struggles to reclaim its orchard glory, another state is also quietly withering. Number 8. Arizona. Arizona used to be the place people went after a lifetime of hard work. With dry, warm weather, year-round sunshine, and affordable housing, it was the ideal retirement paradise for middle-class Americans and Canadians seeking winter refuge. But in the summer of 2025, the very qualities that once made Arizona attractive have become deadly weaknesses. The sun still blazes, but fridges in many homes are running out of greens. The state has long relied on the Yuma region, which supplies up to 90% of America's winter vegetables. Romaine kale cucumbers once stretched endlessly across the fields, but this year many plots are left fallow. The Colorado River, its only lifeline, has dropped to record low levels, forcing the state to severely restrict agricultural water usage. As a second blow, a new policy requires all foreigners in the U.S. for over 30 days to register for security checks regardless of visa type. Within weeks, thousands of immigrant laborers, mostly undocumented, left Arizona farms. No one left to harvest, no one to load crates, no one to drive delivery trucks. Meanwhile, few local youths want to do heavy farm labor for minimum wage. The agricultural supply chain broke right at its base. Supermarkets in Phoenix, Tucson, and Sedona began emptying especially of greens and fresh fruit. A head of lettuce now costs $5.89. Milk from California arrives late. Imported oranges from Mexico rise in price due to tariffs and transport costs. Locals are struggling while Canadians who used to winter here are becoming scarce as living costs rise and diets no longer guarantee health. The trend is clearest in retirement communities. Communal meals that used to feature fresh salads and seasonal fruit now use frozen vegetables or cut produce entirely. For the elderly, these changes are not just inconvenient, they threaten already fragile digestive and immune systems. Arizona hasn't broken down from a firestorm, but from silent cracks in every link of its logistics system, from water to labor to the dinner plate. And when locals can no longer afford to live, why would outsiders come to relax? Number 9. New York. A city can survive without internet for a few days, but it cannot survive without Milk Apple's honey bread. The problem is New York City, the financial media, and tech capital is gradually losing those essentials, because the people who once grew, raised, packed, transported them, have quietly disappeared. Right behind the glass towers lies a withering New York, a land of farmers, family-run farms, and peaceful fields now overrun with weeds and for-sale signs. In the past 18 months alone, over 2,200 family farms in New York have shut down, according to the New York State Farm Bureau. The reasons sound familiar: rising feed costs, labor shortages, erratic weather. But what truly pushed people to give up was the feeling that they couldn't win the game of tax and land. In many rural counties around Syracuse, Albany, and Buffalo, insurance and property taxes surged, some by over 20% in just 1 year. For a small dairy farm, that's enough to plunge an entire family into debt. The cost isn't just in abandoned fields, it's in supermarkets, grocery bills, and breakfast tables. In 2025, over 63% of food consumed in New York City is imported from out of state or abroad, nearly double from a decade ago. Empire apples named after the state once found in every kitchen are now replaced with Chilean apples. Local honey has vanished from Whole Foods. Fresh milk once delivered from Hudson Valley in hours now comes from Wisconsin or is imported from Canada at nearly 1.5 times the price. The first to feel the blow are the middle class and seniors living in suburbs like Albany, Rochester, Kingston. They once prided themselves on eating local. Now they've lost not just a habit, but faith that New York is still livable. They see food prices rise steadily, but don't know why. They thought New York was rich, strong, lacking nothing until the fridge started staying empty for longer. At public schools, nursing homes, and hospitals, which used to contract directly with local farms, they now switch to powdered milk, canned apples, frozen goods. Reluctantly, they are lowering nutritional standards just to get by. More sadly, reverse migration is underway. Longtime residents from upstate New York are leaving, heading for states with friendlier tax policies. To them, New York is no longer the land of opportunity, but of bureaucracy, pressure, and depletion. The story of New York is a cold slap to the illusion of modern society. Because in the age of AI and blockchain, there's still one thing: no technology can produce food. If we can't keep the dairy farmer, the apple grower, the beekeeper, then one day, even the city that never sleeps will lie awake from hunger. And after all this, there's still one more place once considered America's promised land, now bearing the worst consequences of farmers laying down their tools. We now come to the final name on this list. Number 10, Illinois. We've gone through farming states, food-consuming and food-distributing states, places where drought costs or labor shortages pushed entire systems toward paralysis. But the final name on this list is a shock, not because it's weak, but because it was so strong. Illinois, the most advanced ag-tech center in the US, once hoped to lead farming through every crisis, is now standing still. Not for lack of land or machines, but because no one is left to press the button to run the machine. In the heart of the Midwest agricultural belt, Illinois once symbolized farming of the future with moisture-sensing irrigation systems, drone crop monitoring, AI seeding cycle forecasts, and hundreds of miles of farmland linked to export routes via the Mississippi River. But in 2025, over 3,400 small and medium farms in central Illinois announced closure. Many declared indefinite suspension of planting. Not because of weather, but because they couldn't afford fertilizer, diesel, or land ownership taxes. A $500, $1,000 automatic harvester won't run by itself. Someone must refuel it, inspect its systems, and still believe farming is a viable future. Many young people in towns like Decatur or Bloomington are rushing to train in mechanics coding or work at auto plants in Michigan and Indiana. I used to fly drones over fields. Now I install leather seats for Ford, there's insurance vacation, and most importantly, a sense of stability, said a 25-year-old. This quiet exodus of the young is creating an unfillable void. Soybean processing plants run below capacity, grain silos shut down for lack of supply, and ports grow quiet. Residents of Chicago may not see the changes right away, but they feel them in prices. Cooking oil surges. Pork and chicken become scarce. Some suburban supermarkets are forced to ration eggs. One elementary school cut meat from lunch entirely. What once seemed like pandemic-era hardship is now reality in the nation's strongest farming state. Illinois didn't fall from a single blow. It wore down day by day. One worker quits. One farm stops planting. One truck idles for lack of fuel. And so in the most high-tech fields of America, there are no longer machines humming only the sound of wind over abandoned soil. Bitterly, the place with the most investment in technology is now the most fragile, because young people don't believe that a field, no matter how automated, can offer the life they want. They don't hate farms, they just don't want to inherit a profession their parents are already struggling to keep alive. If even Illinois stops producing, then the question is no longer which state will collapse next, but how many places can still hold on. From Kansas to Illinois, from loaves slipping from elderly hands to silent machines on idle fields, what these 10 states now face is not just a shaky agriculture, but a quiet, comprehensive withdrawal of those who once fed America. When the ones who till the land give up, the entire system begins to crack. When greens wilt in fields, oranges rot on branches, milk turns to powder, meat vanishes from shelves. Whether you live in Las Vegas, New York, or Arizona, every citizen suffers. And the most terrifying part, it's not food scarcity. It's that we've assumed food will always be there until it's not. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next content. All analyses in the video are based on current data and an independent perspective, not intended as absolute predictions of the future.